There was a boy in Little Italy, wandering the narrow streets of New York with eyes that spoke louder than his voice. That boy would grow up to become Robert De Niro, the man who would give silence its own language on screen. On the surface, De Niro's story seems like the glamorous rise of another movie star. But beneath the fame, the awards, and the characters that reshaped cinema lies a tale of a quiet outsider, a boy who grew up watching instead of speaking, absorbing the world like a mirror no one could look away from. Robert De Niro was born in 1943 in Manhattan, into a family where art was both a gift and a wound. His father, Robert Sr., was a painter, brilliant but troubled, a man who wrestled with his own identity and walked away from the family when Robert was just a child. His mother, Virginia Admiral, a strong but struggling woman, raised him in the neighborhood that would become the backdrop of his earliest impressions, Little Italy. As a boy, Robert was painfully shy. Classmates gave him a nickname, Bobby Milk, because of his pale skin and quiet presence. He hardly spoke in class, but when he discovered the stage, everything changed. For the first time, he realized that through acting, he could express all the words he couldn't say out loud. It wasn't just performance, it was survival. He immersed himself in theater, studying at the Stella Adler Conservatory and later at Lee Strasberg's Actors Studio. Method acting became not just a technique, but a lifeline. He learned to lose himself in characters so deeply that the shy boy disappeared, and in his place stood men of steel, rage, vulnerability, and complexity. But the path wasn't easy. Hollywood didn't open its doors right away. De Niro walked the streets of New York for years, auditioning for roles that slipped away, doing small plays, surviving on hope. Every rejection was another voice telling him he didn't belong. And yet, he kept going. Because somewhere inside, Robert De Niro knew his silence was not weakness. It was power, waiting for the right moment. Stories like his are easily forgotten in the noise of history, but here we bring them back to life. If you want to walk this journey with us, subscribe now. And so the boy from Little Italy walked into his destiny, a destiny that would soon collide with a young filmmaker named Martin Scorsese, and together they would change cinema forever. The reluctant legend, the year was 1973. A restless young actor, hardened by rejection and sharpened by endless study, walked into a world he didn't yet know would change his life forever. His name, Robert De Niro, and the man waiting to meet him was a director just as restless, just as hungry, Martin Scorsese. Their meeting was not fate written in the stars. It was New York. Two outsiders, both children of immigrant families, both shaped by the chaos of Little Italy, where Catholic guilt, street violence, and survival blended into one. Scorsese had grown up just blocks away from De Niro, yet somehow they had never crossed paths until destiny decided it was time. De Niro was cast in Mean Streets, a film about loyalty, sin, and survival in the back alleys of New York. And in that role, something extraordinary happened. He wasn't just playing a character, he was living one. Every pause, every glance, every explosion of rage felt like it belonged not to the script, but to his soul. When audiences saw him, they didn't just see an actor, they saw truth. Raw, unfiltered, uncomfortable truth. Hollywood took notice, critics whispered his name, directors began to circle, and then came the call that would change everything. Francis Ford Coppola was searching for the perfect man to play a young Vito Corleone in The Godfather Part 2. Someone who could embody the quiet menace and heavy dignity of a man who built an empire from the shadows. De Niro auditioned, and he did something almost unthinkable. He spoke Italian, not broken, not hesitant, but fluent, because he had spent months living in Sicily, studying the language, the mannerisms, the silences. He didn't just want to play Vito Corleone, he wanted to become him. And when the cameras rolled, history was written. De Niro's performance was haunting, magnetic, unforgettable. He would go on to win the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, not just for playing a role, but for vanishing inside it. But behind the curtain of glory, the shy boy from Little Italy was still there, quiet, watching, always carrying the weight of a father who had left, a childhood of loneliness, and the feeling that he would never truly belong. That was his secret. That was his fire. If these stories move you, if you believe legends like Robert De Niro deserve to be remembered, join us on this journey. Subscribe and keep their voices alive. The reluctant legend, New York, the mid-1970s, a city drowning in crime, corruption, and loneliness. And inside that city, a man who couldn't sleep. A man named Travis Bickle. When Robert De Niro took the script of Taxi Driver into his hands, he knew this wasn't just another role. It was an invitation into the darkest corners of the human soul. Travis was not a hero. He was not a villain. He was the reflection of a society on fire. And De Niro was ready to walk through that fire. He prepared the only way he knew how, by becoming. De Niro actually worked 12-hour shifts as a cab driver in New York, driving through the night, absorbing the chaos, the filth, the voices of the city. He lived the exhaustion. He lived the paranoia. He lived the silence that comes from being surrounded by millions, yet feeling invisible. Then came the mirror. One unscripted moment. One scene that wasn't written, but was born from instinct. De Niro stood before the glass, staring at himself with cold eyes. "You talking to me?" A pause. "You talking to me?" He repeated it again and again, each time darker, each time more dangerous, until it became one of the most iconic lines in cinema history. But the genius wasn't in the words. It was in the silence before them, the way his breathing slowed, the way the tension in his shoulders told a story words never could. Taxi Driver was not just a film, it was a warning, a mirror held up to a society losing its grip. And Robert De Niro was the messenger. The role earned him worldwide fame, respect, and fear. People didn't just see an actor anymore. They saw a man who could become anyone, so completely, so terrifyingly, that you forgot the real Robert De Niro even existed. And yet, away from the lights, he remained the same quiet boy from Little Italy, withdrawn, soft-spoken, a man who found his voice only through the characters he brought to life. These are the stories we tell here. Stories that shape us, haunt us, and remind us of who we are. If you believe such voices should never fade, join us, subscribe, and carry them forward. The year was 1980. Martin Scorsese was fighting for his life, literally. Addiction, despair, and the collapse of his career had left him broken. But Robert De Niro, he saw something others didn't. He believed Scorsese still had one more masterpiece inside him, and together they would make it. The story was of Jake LaMotta, a boxer whose fists were as brutal as his demons, a man who could conquer opponents in the ring, but never his own rage. De Niro knew this role would cost him more than anything he had done before, but he was willing to pay the price. For months, he trained like a professional fighter. He stepped into the ring with real opponents, took real punches, bled real blood. He let his body harden under the discipline of boxing until he could move like LaMotta, fight like LaMotta, be LaMotta. But that wasn't enough. Because Jake LaMotta wasn't just a fighter, he was also a man destroyed by his own insecurities, by jealousy, by self-hatred. And to show that destruction, De Niro did something almost unthinkable. When filming the younger LaMotta, lean and powerful, was complete, De Niro disappeared. For months, he traveled to Europe, eating his way through restaurants, gaining over 60 pounds. He came back unrecognizable, bloated, sluggish, gasping for breath. He had transformed himself into the broken, overweight LaMotta of later years. The toll was brutal. His health suffered. His body ached. Doctors warned him. But De Niro didn't care. Because for him, acting wasn't pretending. It was becoming. When Raging Bull premiered, audiences were stunned. Critics called it one of the greatest performances ever captured on film. The Academy agreed. De Niro won the Oscar for Best Actor. But beyond the award, something deeper happened. The shy boy from Little Italy, the quiet man behind the roles, he had proven that art could consume you, destroy you, and yet immortalize you. De Niro had given everything, his body, his spirit, his health, to bring Jake LaMotta to life. And in return, he carved his name into history. These are the sacrifices behind legends, the stories that deserve to be remembered. If you want to keep them alive with us, don't just watch, subscribe, and carry their legacy forward. By the 1990s, Robert De Niro was no longer just an actor. He was a presence, a shadow that fell across every scene he entered. And nowhere was that shadow darker, more unforgettable than in the world of organized crime. With Goodfellas, Martin Scorsese unleashed a story that wasn't just about the mafia. It was about power, loyalty, betrayal, and the intoxicating lure of a life lived outside the law. And at the center of that story stood De Niro, calm, controlled, deadly. His Jimmy Conway wasn't a loud, cartoonish gangster. He was quiet, charming, patient, a man who could smile at you 1 second and order your death the next. De Niro understood something chilling. True power doesn't need to shout. It whispers. Audiences were mesmerized. Critics couldn't look away. And once again, De Niro had redefined the gangster archetype. But he wasn't finished. 5 years later, in Casino, he stepped into the shoes of Sam Ace Rothstein, a man who ruled Las Vegas not with fists, but with calculation. Every gesture, every look, every pause carried weight. De Niro played him like a chess master, someone who saw 10 moves ahead, yet was still undone by love, greed, and betrayal. It was never just about crime. It was about human weakness, about men who built empires only to watch them crumble from within. And through it all, Robert De Niro didn't just act. He embodied. He made you believe these men existed, not on the screen, but on the streets. That somewhere in New York, or Vegas, or Chicago, there was a quiet figure watching, waiting, deciding your fate. By now, audiences no longer saw Robert De Niro as the shy boy from Little Italy. They saw him as the face of an entire era of cinema, the face of power, the face of fear. But behind the camera, he remained soft-spoken, almost uncomfortable with the fame. While the world saw a legend, he still carried the weight of the boy who once felt invisible. These are the contradictions that shape greatness, the silence that hides behind the storm. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, not forgotten, not lost, then stand with us. Subscribe. Keep these voices alive. By the mid-1990s, Robert De Niro had already carved his place in history. But instead of resting on reputation, he chose to push further, to explore the darkest corners of the human spirit. In Cape Fear, he became Max Cady, one of the most terrifying villains ever brought to the screen. With a body covered in tattoos, a smile that froze the blood, and a voice that slithered like poison, De Niro was unrecognizable. He didn't just play a criminal seeking revenge. He became a nightmare. He transformed his body, sculpting it like a predator. He spoke with a slow southern drawl, every word dripping with menace. And in the silence between his words, audiences felt a chill, because they realized evil doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in your ear. Then, in 1995, came Heat, a film that would forever be remembered not just for its story, but for one scene, one moment, where two giants of cinema finally collided, De Niro and Al Pacino. For years, audiences had waited to see them face each other. And when it happened, it wasn't with guns drawn or fists flying. It was in a quiet diner. Two men, one cop, one criminal, sitting across from each other, talking. The tension was unbearable. Every pause, every glance, every sip of coffee was loaded with meaning. De Niro's character, Neil McCauley, wasn't a caricature of a criminal. He was calm, disciplined, intelligent. A man who lived by one rule: never get attached to anything you can't walk out on in 30 seconds if the heat is around the corner. That rule defined him. That silence defined him. And when the inevitable clash came, it wasn't just two men fighting. It was destiny colliding in the Los Angeles night. With Cape Fear and Heat, Robert De Niro proved once more that he wasn't bound by genre. He could be a monster. He could be a philosopher of crime. He could be anything the story demanded. And through it all, he carried the same secret weapon he always had: silence. Silence that spoke louder than words. These are the stories we live to tell. Stories that remind us of the power of transformation, of the beauty and danger of cinema. If you want to keep walking this journey with us, subscribe and never let these voices fade. By the late 1990s, Robert De Niro had nothing left to prove. He was already a legend, an Oscar winner, a cultural icon, the face of cinematic intensity. And yet, he refused to be trapped in the cage of his own reputation. When audiences thought of De Niro, they saw mob bosses and tortured souls. But then came Meet the Parents. Suddenly, the man who once terrified us in Taxi Driver was playing Jack Burns, the overprotective father-in-law with a lie detector in his basement. He didn't just play comedy, he mastered it. The timing, the straight-faced delivery, the way his silence, once used to terrify, was now used to make people laugh. Audiences couldn't believe it. The same man who embodied Travis Bickle and Jake LaMotta was now delivering lines that became part of pop culture. "I have nipples, Greg. Can you milk me?" It was a reinvention, a reminder that true actors aren't bound by genre, they bend it. But De Niro never abandoned the weight of drama. In the 2000s and beyond, he returned again and again to roles that demanded depth. And then came The Irishman. It was more than just a film. It was a reunion. Scorsese, Pacino, Pesci, and De Niro at the center, carrying the story of Frank Sheeran, a man reflecting on a lifetime of choices, betrayals, and regrets. De Niro played him not with fireworks, but with restraint, with silence, with the heavy breathing of an old man haunted by ghosts. He gave us not the anger of youth, but the sorrow of age. And in those quiet moments, when Frank sat alone in a nursing home, waiting for death, we saw something extraordinary. We saw Robert De Niro, the boy from Little Italy, the shy child once called Bobby Milk, now at the end of a journey. A man who had given his entire life to disappearing into others, finally stripped bare, finally just himself. It was not just a performance, it was a farewell, not to acting, but to the idea of immortality. Because through The Irishman, De Niro showed us that even legends grow old, and even legends are mortal. But their stories, their voices, their silences remain. And if you want to walk with us, as we honor those stories, if you want to keep these voices alive, then stand with us, subscribe, and let their legacy live on through you. There is a silence that follows great men. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of a life lived so fully, so fiercely, that words can no longer hold it. Robert De Niro is now in his 80s, his hair silver, his face etched with the lines of time. The boy from Little Italy, the shy child, the quiet teenager, the hungry young actor, has become one of the last living monuments of an era that will never return. And yet, he never chased fame. He never shouted his greatness. He let the work speak. He let the silence speak. From Taxi Driver's haunted mirror to Raging Bull's broken champion, from the chilling calm of Goodfellas to the aching loneliness of The Irishman, De Niro gave us not just performances. He gave us pieces of his soul. He showed us rage. He showed us love. He showed us men consumed by their demons and men crushed by their regrets. And in doing so, he reminded us of something eternal. That cinema is not just entertainment. It is memory. It is history. It is humanity itself reflected on a screen. De Niro's journey is not over. He continues to work, to create, to challenge himself even when he has nothing left to prove. But for us, for the audience who watched him across 5 decades, his greatest gift is already given. The gift of truth, the gift of silence that spoke louder than 1,000 words. And when the day comes, when the lights dim, and Robert De Niro finally takes his last bow, the world will not remember just the awards or the headlines or the fame. The world will remember the way he made us feel, the way he held a mirror to our darkest fears and our deepest hopes, the way a shy boy named Bobby Milk became the voice of generations who could not find the words for themselves. This is his legacy. This is his immortality. So as you sit here, listening to his story, know this: you are now a keeper of that legacy, a witness to the silence that became legend. And if you believe, as we do, that stories like these must never fade into the noise of time, then stand with us, subscribe, share, and carry Robert De Niro's voice forward, because legends only die when we forget them.